Welcome to this presentation. My name is Brianna Nelson, and I have titled this presentation, Reading Comprehension. What does vocabulary have to do with it? And so my goal today is just to share the connection between reading comprehension and vocabulary. To start this presentation on vocabulary, which we know is the knowledge of words and word meanings, I thought I would share this great quote from the Vocabulary Handbook, which says, "Vocabulary is not something that can ever be fully mastered. It is something that expands and deepens over the course of a lifetime." So the question is, how is vocabulary tied to reading comprehension? What is its connection and why is it so important? Well, first we can look at the simple view of reading, which says that word recognition times language comprehension equals reading comprehension. And we know that reading comprehension is the goal of reading. So looking at the simple view of reading by Goff and Tumner, we know that language comprehension, that second component, is essential for reading comprehension. And vocabulary is an area of language comprehension and is therefore necessary for reading comprehension. You will see this by looking also at Scarborough's reading rope. So if you look under language comprehension at the top, you'll see that vocabulary is the second component under background knowledge and along with language structure, verbal reasoning, and literacy knowledge. So it's one of those strands that's going to come together, and once students become increasingly strategic with it, along with their knowing the other components of language comprehension and word recognition, that's going to help them become better skilled readers. To learn more about the connection between reading comprehension and vocabulary, I used several different resources, but three of the resources were peer-reviewed articles, and so I'll just summarize those articles that I referenced quickly. The first article was using picture books for implicit and explicit teaching of vocabulary, comprehension, and literacy skills. And this article discusses a traditional approach to vocabulary instruction, which involves using dictionary definitions versus a preferred method involving picture books. In the picture book, students will see and hear vocabulary in context, and the article specifically discusses the benefits of vocabulary instruction through shared reading, read-alouds, and text talk. The second article, Vocabulary Instruction in the Early Grades, discusses the importance of teaching vocabulary, especially in the early grades. The article emphasizes the importance of providing definitions of vocabulary words, as well as the importance of using vocabulary words in different contexts. Garden reviews the different phases of learning to read, the simple view of reading, the Scarborough's reading rope, and their connection to vocabulary. Finally, the author summarizes indirect and direct vocabulary instruction and discusses vocabulary instruction strategies. The third article was called Get All Jazzed Up for Vocabulary Instruction, Strategies That Engage. And in this article, the authors discuss the importance of explicit vocabulary instruction and mention the use of two engaging vocabulary teaching strategies, the graffiti wall and the picture word wall. These two methods are effective because they present vocabulary through context, and they also help connect to students' background knowledge while fostering word consciousness. So while the method that I'm going to present wasn't the graffiti word or the word wall or even using picture books, all of these articles highlighted things that are important for vocabulary instruction, especially using like a student-friendly dictionary definition, and then also the importance of direct vocabulary instruction. And finally, also just pointing to the fact that it's important for our students to hear the words, vocabulary words in multiple contexts. So over the next 2 slides, I just want to talk a little bit about reading comprehension and vocabulary, and specifically, what does the research have to say about the connection between the two? So, according to the research, first, we have something that says that studies suggest that in secondary education, differences in reading comprehension are determined mainly by variability in language comprehension skills, including vocabulary knowledge. Second, vocabulary instruction is important in children's reading comprehension development and predicts reading achievement. Third, if teachers spend a majority of time teaching decoding, that can cause gaps in knowledge because children will struggle with comprehension if they do not know the meaning of words in the text. And then last is something related to our ELL students. The relationship between language variables, including vocabulary knowledge and reading comprehension, was much stronger for bilingual students than for their monolingual students in a study for low achievers. Okay, so according to the research part 2, there is a lack of robust vocabulary instruction in many American schools, and robust vocabulary instruction is characterized by explicit instruction in specific word meanings and word learning strategies, and involves students' incidental word learning. And then third, the traditional vocabulary instruction approach of getting a word list, looking up the word in a dictionary, and then using the word in a sentence does not include continued practice of the word in context. Therefore, minimal retention or comprehension of the word occurs. And then finally, just another piece of research that says that children need direct and indirect vocabulary instruction. So on the last slide I shared, it talked about the importance from the research that children have direct and indirect vocabulary instruction, but my focus in this presentation is going to be on direct vocabulary instruction, or you probably have heard of it more as explicit vocabulary instruction. And so there are 2 different things involved in explicit vocabulary instruction. You could be explicitly teaching word learning strategies or explicitly teaching specific words, and that's going to be the focus of this presentation, would be explicit teaching of specific words. And so I'm pulling the method that I'm going to share with you today from a couple of different resources, but from the Vocabulary Handbook, from Bringing Words to Life, and then also from a presentation I watched by Sharon Vaughn in a session during the Spotlight on Structured Literacy, specifically on the science of reading comprehension. And the part where she talks about vocabulary instruction, I want to talk about her graphic organizer and how to incorporate things from the Vocabulary Handbook and Bringing Words to Life into her graphic organizer. So then, even more specifically about explicit vocabulary instruction, I want to kind of hone in on when do you do the explicit vocabulary instruction. And in the Vocabulary Handbook, I really appreciated how they kind of shared different ways. And the first thing they mentioned was doing text talk. So like when you're doing a read aloud method, you briefly describe a word while you're reading it, but then you keep reading, and then you do your explicit instruction in the vocabulary after you're finished reading the passage. And then the other method they talked about was the method for independently reading text. And in that situation, they recommend explicitly teaching the words beforehand, and that's what I'm going to talk about today, when to, or how to teach the vocabulary explicitly beforehand, with the idea that they're going to be reading text independently after. So the steps that are can be used for explicit vocabulary instruction before independent reading are listed here. So first would be to choose the vocabulary words from the passage to teach. And the research shows us that those should really be tier 2 words that are academic words that are used across several different content areas, and that students will see often during their schooling experience. And then can read and pronounce the word, and also have the students pronounce and say the word. Then you can give a student-friendly definition, since students will remember that better than a dictionary definition. And then you could provide a picture if you can. Sharon Vaughn does that, and I'll show you a graphic organizer with that in there. Use the word in a different context than will be used in the passage, so they're seeing it in multiple different contexts. Then also you could even help the students make word associations. So you could have a list of 4 words where 2 of the words are related to the vocabulary word and 2 aren't, and help them work through which words those are associated with the vocabulary word. Then you can even make other words with the word, so spending a little bit of time even talking about the morphology of the word. So if you're talking about the word rely, you can make the word relies and relying, so they make that connection as well. And then last would be to engage actively with the word, and so you can do that by asking the students questions like, who do you rely on to get you from school? Or have you ever, which is usually a question too, or a finish the idea, where you have a sentence starter with the vocabulary word, and then you have them finish the sentence to show that they understand the meaning of the word. Let me just take a moment to go over again tier 2 words. I thought this graphic with the pyramid and the different tiers was helpful, but just a reminder that tier 2 words are those robust, high-frequency words that students encounter across the content areas. And these words have multiple meanings and can have multiple meanings and are referred to as academic vocabulary words. So here are some examples, like bolt, fine, amiable, harmony, rare, blush, valuable, astute. So here is a graphic organizer that I saw that kind of brought all these things together for explicit instruction. And so you'll see the different components on here. You'll see the word right here in the middle, and then you'll see the student-friendly definition, then the picture, and then the word used in different contexts, and then a box with word associations. And then over to the right side, you'll see a box where you can make other words with that word. And then down at the bottom is really space for actively engaging with the word, like using the word in different sentences, or asking questions or finishing the idea. Any of that can be put at the bottom of this graphic organizer. So you'll also see a picture of me using that graphic organizer during a lesson with a student. Using the explicit vocabulary instruction method I described, as far as assessment goes, you could informally assess the students during the last part of the activity where they engage actively with the word section to see that they correctly engage with the word, showing their understanding of the vocabulary. And then after a week of 2 of vocabulary instruction, you could maybe create a multiple choice vocabulary exam, or some other sort of vocabulary exam could be created to give a more formal assessment. Some recommendations when teaching vocabulary to your students would be, first off, to limit how many you teach them in a day. The vocabulary handbook recommends teaching around 2 words a day. Then number 2, to use your knowledge of what words students need to know to help you select the words. So you know what words they know, what words they don't know as a class, and that can help guide your instruction. Also, you want to provide lots of review and practice with vocabulary words over several days so that it really sticks in their memory. And you can even have them record them in a notebook or have a word wall with those words, but make sure you use them so students continue to hear them in practice. And then the 4th recommendation would be, in addition to pictures to support learning, you could add motion or gestures to your vocabulary learning when it's appropriate. So we started off this presentation with the title, Reading Comprehension. What does vocabulary have to do with it? And hopefully we learned that vocabulary has a lot to do with reading comprehension. We talked about the simple view of reading and how vocabulary is related to the language comprehension part of that equation. And then we also talked about Scarborough's reading rope again and how vocabulary is also modeled in this picture and again under the language comprehension strands of the reading rope. Then we also talked about what does the research say about vocabulary instruction and comprehension. And we also talked about how explicit instruction in addition to indirect instruction is important. We kind of focused on explicit instruction in this presentation and specifically explicit instruction before students independently read a passage. And finally, we talked about different steps to help implement explicit instruction for students in vocabulary. So I hope you enjoyed this presentation.